In the previous programs, we examined the sixth and fifth priorities of conceptual power: military weapons and weapons of genocide. They belong to the fast-acting, but the weakest material weapon. From today's program, our conversation will be focused on informational weapons, to the number of which the conception of social safety deadwater includes economic, ideological, historical chronological, and finally, the first and most powerful methodological priority, because victories at this level ensure stability over centuries at the least. Viktor Alexeyevich, what grounds do you have to believe that economics is not one of the branches of science, but a means of supranational governance?
From the standpoint of conceptual power, the well-being of any country is to a large extent determined, first of all, by the adopted system of monetary circulation, whether it prints its own money or uses others' money, what payment is charged for the use of money to those who produce goods. All other disputes between politicians and economists serve as nothing more than a cover for concealing the algorithm proclaimed and mastered by M. Rothschild. Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws. Under the same market, capitalist, and other laws, we have a standard of living of Switzerland on the one hand, and Argentina, Colombia, India on the other. In the same way, our country, without changing the system of monetary circulation, is doomed to poverty, and all this despite the fact that we have raw materials, energy resources, human resources. We are incomparably richer in relation to most regions of the globe, starting first of all with the living on our energy resources Europe. It would not be so offensive to agree with such a situation if some very cunning, clever, complex systems of enslavement were built against us. The following fact really hurts me when I see the fact that our gullible people, who have not comprehended the system of conceptual power, are being plundered, simply speaking, brazenly and primitively through usury.
The concise Encyclopedia of Economics defines usury as the provision of money at an extremely high interest rate.
This definition commits the sin of ambiguity, and we will return to it later. A high interest rate can be 200%, like in Russia, or 1.75% in the USA, 0.15% in Japan. For now, let's try to explain this global algorithmics in a simple way. You borrow at interest 100,000 rubles from a neighbor, and you have to pay him back 25% more per year, as today is required by the central bank of all users of its money. Every month you have to pay in the form of interest an amount of 2,000 rubles, the amount that you are able to pay monthly. But you simply have no money to repay the debt. This means that in 4 years, you have to pay 100,000 rubles as interest. How much will you owe? Yes, the same 100,000. In 40 years, you will have already paid 1 million rubles, but you will anyway owe the same amount. And this may happen all your life. The main thing is that you never repay the debt itself, and always have to be hooked on the interest needle. Today, our country, having its own paper and paint, nonetheless does not print its own money, but imports the green paper from outside. The occupation through the green helmet in Russia has no prospects, as history has shown. And now the green dollar occupation has been applied against us. But the socio-economic consequences of this occupation are the same. We have a more serious economic collapse than during the war. You and I, with the help of representatives of the global mafia in the leadership of the country, not having seen the dollar 15 years ago, overnight become the owners of 1/3 of the world's dollar waste paper and turn out to owe international usurers $160 billion, with an annual state budget in recent years of $40 to $60 billion. We will never return such an amount of external debt without changing the conception of life arrangements in our society. And we, our children and grandchildren, will always pay insane interest, which is ruining the country much more mercilessly than tribute to the Mongol Tartar yoke. In those times, we only paid 10% of the produced product. Conversely, by changing the conception, we have the ability to pay back in the shortest possible time. Do not forget that 1/3 of the dollar mass is stored in our country. The result of this global legalized plundering, according to the biblical conception, is given in the book of M. Kennedy, Interest and Inflation-Free Money. On average, through interest and usury, the so-called developed countries have a geschäft of more than $100 million a day. This is the secret of their prosperity.
Could you name some specific figures for certain countries?
Yes, sure. Annual interest payments of Brazil, $42 billion. Mexico, $40 billion. Hungary pays 20% of its gross product. Indonesia, 19%. At one time, Romania was the only country that was not addicted to the drug of external debt. It was for this that Nicolae Ceausescu paid his life to the international mafia. Today's Russia is a living monument to this doctrine of usurious slavery.
But why does it happen that our country and almost all more or less wealthy people prefer the dollar?
In order to make other people's, but not your own money, attractive, 3 system-forming mechanisms have been launched in our country. The first one is internal usury, which beforehand reached 210% per annum, but interest payments are always attributed to the prime cost, manifoldly increasing the price of production and devaluing the ruble. Second mechanism for undermining the ruble is the insane increase in tariffs of natural monopolies, which also increases the cost of production and destabilizes the economy. Any increase in tariffs is madness of governance, since it only destabilizes the situation, changing the scale of prices and artificially devaluing the ruble. And finally, the most cunning third mechanism comes down to the fact that we sell all our riches, gas, timber, oil, gold, for green dollar paper. That is why it is strong, because you can buy everything from Russia for green dollars. This is not the case for any country that has everything in order in its head.
Viktor Alexeyevich, what about the attitude to usury in the world as a whole?
In the culture of many peoples, usury, receiving of income without participation in creation, was perceived as a grave sin and was limited and prohibited and punished up to the death penalty. Even England, the current citadel of usury, only in 1854 abandoned the legal prohibitions and restrictions on usury. But the theft, overshadowed by the thieves' state legality, does not cease to be a vice that corrodes and destroys society. And now let's see how the 3 fundamental worldview sources of biblical civilization, Quranic civilization, and Russian civilization relate to usury. Russian is of course not a name in a passport, but a state of the soul, a measure of nraviousness. So let's turn to the Bible and take the book of Deuteronomy 23:19 and 28:12 and the book of prophet Isaiah 60:10 and read, "Thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brother, usury of money, usury of victuals, usury of anything that is lent upon usury." Deuteronomy 23:19. "Unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury, but unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon usury, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all that thou settest thine hand to in the land whither thou goest to possess it. And thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee." Deuteronomy 28:12. "And the sons of strangers shall build up thy walls, and their kings shall minister unto thee. For in my wrath I smote thee, but in my favor have I had mercy on thee. Therefore thy gates shall be open continually, they shall not be shut day or night, that men may bring unto thee the forces of the Gentiles, and that their kings may be brought. For the nation and the kingdom that will not serve thee shall perish, yea, those nations shall be utterly wasted." Isaiah 60:10-12. That is, the doctrine of Deuteronomy and Isaiah is a kind of instruction on the scheme of enslaving peoples and nations bypassing their consciousness. All that remains is to feed them pseudo-theories of monetarism so that they don't print their own money, but get into debt, and feed them pseudo-economics in the form of Marxism, through which it is possible to bump 2 mutually complementary wings of an essentially unified team of employers and employees against one another, so that usurers can watch this ridiculous fight between 2 equally oppressed by them links of productive labor. Catch a thief. It is already the 2nd century since the usurers have been encouraging the efforts of all the left and the right political forces equally pleasing to them. They are encouraging the crowd that stand under their banners. And now let's turn to the Quran, and it will become clear to us why a thoughtlessly negative attitude towards it is so strongly imposed. Because it, on the 4th economic priority, directly opposes the Bible, declaring usury to be the most grave sin. Those who swallow usury cannot rise up, save as he ariseth, whom the devil hath prostrated by his touch. That is because they say, trade is just like usury, whereas God permitteth trading, and forbiddeth usury. He unto whom an admonition from his Lord cometh, and he refraineth in obedience thereto, he shall keep the profits of that which is past, and his affair henceforth is with God. As for him who returneth to usury, such are rightful owners of the fire, they will abide therein. Alexander Pushkin, who inherited the system of knowledge of the Holy Russian Zhrezhud through his father, and of the ancient Egyptian Zhrezhud through his mother, deeply symbolically expressed his attitude to the future of usury, and consequently to the biblical conception as a whole. Imp, tucking neath himself a cloven trotter, or flames of hell a skewer the usurer rotates. Into the smoke-black trough does hot fat drip and splatter, and the crisp-seared money-lender is devoured in the blaze. This execution carries meaning great, having ever in his view but one objective acquisition. Of his debtor's fat did this same wicked old man swill, and these were flames of your world he rotated without pity. We have no doubt that the time has come for the practical embodiment of the prophetic image-symbolic predictions of A.S. Pushkin. The day of the collapse of the biblical conception has come, about which Chuchev speaks openly, without Pushkin's encoding of information through symbols. Once the hammer of the justice of the Lord smashed and destroyed the primal temple, where the high priest gasped his last, impaled upon his own sword.
Viktor Alexeyevich, but does everything you say have anything to do with me? Because I do not take money at interest.
This is a deep delusion. Water supply companies, subway, electricity supply companies, and all housing dwellings are also credited through a usurious scheme. That is why any of your payments obviously contains a usurious component, reaching up to 70 to 80% of the cost of the paid goods or services. There is a lot of talk about helping villages through state compensation, 2/3 of the central bank's discount rate to the banking sector. But this is a blatant deception of the public. In fact, this is assistance to banks, and not to peasants in villages, who, even theoretically, cannot pay 25% per annum with a profitability of a few percent and with a capital turnover cycle of 1 year. Today, we pay 40% of taxes from the GDP at an international rate of 10 to 15%. Why? Because the state gives away all these taxes in the form of interest payments to international usurers who show touching concern about the tax collection and tax system.
Where on the globe do algorithms of usury dominate?
Usury is the core and essence of the biblical conception of governance, according to which the countries of the Euro-American conglomerate live. The last centuries, especially during the times of Sergei Witte and Viktor Gerashenko, this algorithm enslaved our country. Bypassing consciousness, other regions of the planet, in particular the Islamic one, are also enclosed on this algorithm. Countries loyally and unconditionally subordinating to this doctrine of usurious enslavery are marked with the white, blue, red color of their flags. So the choice of our flag is not accidental. The male population living in them is marked with a noose around the neck called a tie. At one time, this ritual object replaced the collar on the neck of the slaves of ancient Rome, for the pseudo-Zhrezes realized that a slave who is aware of his slavery works worse and is more prone to moods of protest than the one who is enslaved through the bypassing of his consciousness. It is difficult to imagine Stalin in a tie. He understood the meaning of it. You will not see a tie in the national clothes of peoples trying to disconnect themselves from the biblical enslavement. I do not recognize the idea that a Russian is a bad worker. A Russian is a bad slave, even if he feels the slavery only in the unconscious levels of his psyche.
Could you give a historical background on the ubiquitous dollar?
The paper dollar appeared in 1785 as a child of the Revolutionary War in the United States. Its second rebirth was caused by the Civil War between the North and the South. Then the dollar became the godfather of all wars and terror, having gained a foothold as a result of World War I, and in particular World War II. The wars, as you remember, were organized to pull down the currencies of the warring territories. From 1944 Under the Bretton Woods Agreement, the dollar had a gold backing that collapsed in 1971, but the fooled humanity, due to inertia and PR actions, has been taking this meaningless paper as money for over 30 years. Let's read what is written on the dollar. In God we trust. And that's it. That is, by default, a different meaning is embedded here. We do not trust in the dollar strategically. This is a warning to initiates to not rely heavily on the dollar. The green paper is the most profitable export commodity for the United States. The country's rubes exchange 10 kilograms of paper in $100 bills for 100 kilograms of gold, as well as for gas, oil, timber, and so on.
Viktor Alexeyevich, recently the mass media have been paying great attention to the issues of investment attractiveness. How is this issue viewed from the standpoint of the conception of social safety, dead water?
All the attractiveness, including investment, of our country may be conditioned by the attractiveness of our money, our ruble. And this, in turn, is determined by what one can buy for rubles. Who needs our rubles if we give away all our wealth for that green paper? This is complete madness or blatant betrayal of our financial and economic blocks. Not a single more or less reasonable state does this. Japan, for example, back in 1948, legally prohibited the sale of its goods for any money other than the yen. That is why it is stable and has grown 3 times in relation to the dollar since 1970. That is why, in comparison with the ruble, the dollar is stable, since you can buy everything in Russia for it: gold, oil, gas, timber, etc. If we shift to the export of our goods for rubles, there will be a queue for the ruble, and the dollar will not be in demand. There is every reason for this, because the volume of our exports exceeds by 2 times the volume of imports.
Who in our country should, in your opinion, handle these issues?
The money of our country is governed, as you know, by the central bank, which has no direct relation to our state. This is a program-adaptive module built into our statehood by the external conceptual power, and which works under its leadership. De facto, the central bank is not subordinate to either the president or the government. We, like the government, do not care whether to borrow money from the central bank or from the Rothschilds or from the IMF. It is even more expensive from the central bank. De facto, the central bank is a private corporation that receives seigniorage. That is, as we have already noted, the difference between the face value of the money issued and the cost of making it. This is a very interesting privatized business that Mr. Gerashenko and Co. had. The number 1 figure in the ruin of Russia was undoubtedly Gerashenko. All the rest, as they say in mathematics, are figures of the second order. Gerashenko, like Witte in his time, artificially bled dry the country's monetary system, for which the West formed images for them as professionals. Any changes in the Gerashenko era were impossible. In the ranks of the supranational governance system, he is by far hierarchically higher than any government structures or leaders in the country. With his resignation, in Russia there appeared potential opportunities for the shift from the course of ruin to the course of prosperity. For some reason, it is only President Putin who poses the question on the nationalization of the central bank. Moreover, he has not been able to succeed in this question since the autumn of 2000. None of the leaders of our numerous parties, except for the conceptual party Unity, supports the president in this matter. None of the so-called patriotic leaders, including G.A. Zhuganov, supports the president's line. Zhuganov is also silent about everything that is announced in our radio program, although this information has been given to him several times, including by me personally. It is a pity that such a large number of our people still believe the priest Gapon, who stirs up contentless emotions in our society that hide the essence of the schemes of ruining the country.
Viktor Alexeyevich, summing up, could you suggest algorithms for overcoming the crisis that the country's economy is in?
The ABC, which pseudo-economists, pseudo-patriots are silent about, is that our country, without changing the system of monetary circulation, is doomed to poverty. And all this despite the fact that we have raw materials, energy resources, human resources, incomparably richer in relation to most regions of the globe, starting first of all with Europe, that lives at our expense. And for a real improvement in the life of people, we need the following: to refuse from the faceless, read the inscriptions on the banknotes of the ruble, not related to the real wealth of our country tickets of one of the legal entities, the Bank of Russia. We need to nationalize it and make the profit of money issuance, seigniorage, the property of our state. To introduce into the circulation a means of payment issued by Treasury on behalf of the state, the energy ruble, backed by all types of the country's energy resources, gas, oil, coal, electricity. The issuance volumes should be such that they fully, without external borrowing, back up the circulation of all commodity flows, the formation of working capital of enterprises, and the population of the country. To ensure non-inflationary development of the country, introduce a legislative ban on the revision of tariffs and of the receiving of income outside of the sphere of creation within the producing nothing financial credit system through usurious interest rates, and this interest rate must be strictly zero. To ensure the stability of the new national currency, strictly observe the standard of its energy supply, co-measuring the amount of money in circulation with the consumed energy potential at the input of the production system, and consequently with the real volume of products. Move step by step to the sale of the country's raw materials and energy resources abroad, exclusively for the Russian energy ruble. Refuse to accept the backed-by-nothing currencies of other countries, and above all, dollar payments, as required by the Constitution of the Russian Federation. Carry out an explanatory campaign on the unreliability of our population's dollar savings. Replace dollar savings with Russian energy rubles on the basis of inflation-free issuance. Return the backed-by-nothing dollar funds that we have in our state and thus repay the state debt of Russia, thereby getting out of the dead-end usurious slavery. This is the economic ABC, without mastering which we will never take our country out of the direct supranational governance of the external conceptual power. We are convinced that the comprehension of the aforementioned by the people will ultimately lead to the impossibility of further implementation of the course of ruining our economy on the part of our own government.